Hey, welcome back to another episode of Subscription Radio. I'm your host, DJ Fish, aka Ben Fisher. With me, I have a special guest, Landon Shaw. He's the co-founder of Sweatpants Agency. They're a growth agency that works with brands across consumer, a lot of subscription brands. I know that in my life, the sort of probably your biggest name was Hunt a Killer, which was like a massive success. And I actually had a call with someone last week when we were talking about subscription experiences, and she was like, she just randomly brought up Hunt a Killer around how she got sucked into actually upgrading, I think, into an annual after she was like through like one of the games, which Eric and I've talked about as just like a strategy that you guys have employed around the subscription. So and it's super nice to have you on the show. I know that during the preamble we were talking about sort of some topics that have been top of mind for you, and so I think there's some really rich stuff we can talk about in terms of testing frameworks, and then for better and worse, AI. Thank you for coming on the show, and let's jump into it. I think you recently had been tweeting about just different ways you've approached testing frameworks, and so maybe we could share a little bit about like where's your head at and how are you applying testing? Because I know you've said you use it both operationally of testing in the company, but also just the way you think about marketing and Facebook's and sort of how that's changed.
Sure. Yeah. And by the way, thanks for having me. Super excited to be here. In terms of testing frameworks, I think the place I like to start when I think about testing frameworks is actually something Chamath Palihapitiya, who's obviously well known for the All In podcast, godfather of Facebook algorithm. He had a talk about how Facebook looked at testing. They had a motto that was move fast and break things. And basically he explained this really eloquently, that essentially the kind of like the backbone of that is there is a rate of growth that we know to the things that we know, right? Like we know the rate of growth for things that we know, but for the things we don't know, we have to assume that the rate of growth is infinite. And so that's what motivates them to move fast and break stuff, right? So like when I think about frameworks and testing, I'm kind of under that same, I think that's the point of testing, right? A/B testing. So in Facebook, if we're going to get tactical, the way that we set up our structures has a lot to do with more of a way of thinking, which is built on the scientific method. And then everything else beneath that is tactical. So that's the strategic way. Everything beneath that is tactic. And what we were talking about before is for the last 2 years is a lot of the tactics have fallen to the wayside. Button pushing, like this is something we've known for a long time now. Button pushing is becoming less important and less valuable. So now we're looking at more of the creative side and the framework side, or at least the strategic way that a media buyer would set up something and optimize something and make decisions. And then the creative side, how we're actually making decisions on the creative level. I'm not going to talk about the creative level. I'm going to be more focused on like inside of the ad account. What are we looking at and what are we thinking about in terms of setting up our structure? So a recent tweet that I had was, that a one size fits all for testing structures inside of an ad account is probably not the healthiest way to approach an ad account, unless you have one ad account and then, that's your size. Like that's what's going to fit for you. But if you have, multiple ad accounts, especially so for like talking about agencies, freelancers, if you're looking at multiple ad accounts, there's so many variables that are at play here. And one of the biggest ones that we're not talking about, or at least is not talked about often enough, is Facebook's preference to spend. So the way that Facebook allocates budget to an ad set, different ad sets under a CBO or different ads under, an ABO, right? Like I'm sure, probably people that are listening have seen this. Why does one ad get all the budget when I'm testing, all these ads? Well, what do you do with that? How do you get statistical significance from your testing if you can only test one ad at a time in an ad set? Or on the opposite side, all your ads get equal spent behind them. Mm-hmm. And so that's the first thing that we consider. There's obviously other things that we consider. So if we're looking at spend preference, we're also considering what's our budget and our risk tolerance. And then kind of woven into that is what exactly are we testing? So when we get down to the framework, and we keep diving down, the deepest it gets is individual variables. So individual variable would be the actual video or image, the body copy, the headline, the description, the CTA, the link that you're sending people to. These are all individual variables. And even in the ad set level, I'm looking at the attribution window as an individual variable, the budget type, whether you're using CBO or ABO as an individual variable, Pretty much anything that you can, manipulate inside of the account, those are all individual variables. And if, we keep following this all the way down, the way that we look at testing frameworks and optimization inside of the ad account in terms of structure is getting the most, statistical significance for each of these individual variables. So we've hit the end of the road here on like the variables and all that stuff. So now what we do when we're looking at an account and finding out what do we need to test, because I think that's the first thing that typically we answer when we're looking at our testing structure, right? So like the way that we structure things might be dependent on, how this, Facebook allocates budget between ads, your budget and your risk tolerance. But like to define what exactly we're going to test, I'm looking at the individual variables. So what I'll do is I'll pull a pivot table from Facebook's data, understanding that, not all of this is 100% accurate, but it's going to be at least comparable, I hope. And I'm going to pull the pivot tables for each individual variable, headline, copy, creative, and it's going to get its own pivot table. So what this is doing is, and I'll also, by the way, like for one little piece of context, it's specifically prospecting, getting all the retargeting, anything else out of there, right? So we're looking at just prospecting, and we're going to pull those pivot tables and look at each individual variables. It's kind of a tongue twister after a while. We're going to look at all those aggregated up in like how those have performed in every different environment. So these are variables. We're looking at environments, and we're going to find a controlled environment based on the best performing variables. How you determine that usually is quantity and quality. So like the most amount of sales for, the least, like the lowest cost. And from there, we set up our tests, right? So now we have an idea of a controlled variable. I can then go to my creative team and say, I need this copy, I need these creatives based on what we know is performing the best in an account, right? And like a lot of times you'll be able to just see what ad is performing the best right now. But this is a little bit more of a nitty-gritty way to kind of scoop up everything you've spent money on and say, okay, now I have a little bit more context behind my account, not just this one ad in this one environment. I have every single variable in multiple different environments. And, sometimes you'll see like, this headline might not be in the best performing ad right now, but if you look at its aggregated data, it's only second place to this headline over here. That's been in all these other environments and has the lowest cost and a comparable amount of sales. So, okay, great. Now we have some ideas of what we're going to test. There's multiple things that you can test. You can either look at it in two ways. How am I going to improve on what we're already doing? Or am I coming up with a completely new idea? Like those are two different ways I think about testing, because, the spend is going to be the way you look at how much you're willing to spend on these hypotheses are going to be different. If it's a completely new idea, you're going to have to come up with multiple variables, which means you're going to be testing in, not completely controlled environments. And you're going to have to spend a little bit more to get a better idea of how that hypothesis is going to play out. In terms of the iterations on what's currently working, that's mostly what, I think what most people deal with on a day-to-day basis, and more like brainstorming on like the new ideas. So like when you're talking about iterating those, now we can talk about like Facebook spend preference and what the structures look like. So if you have, let's say you have an example of, 8 to 10 ads that you want to test. We have to kind of create some assumptions. One, we're going to assume that these are all essentially testing against the same hypothesis, which is improving or iterating on what's working. We're not going to go super far out of the realm of like testing different types of angles or, completely brand new hypotheses. In this structure, so like, okay, we have 8 to 10 ads. They're all generally under the same sentiment that we're trying to like test for. There's two polar opposite ways that I would structure this based on your account's preference to spend, within an ad set. The first one is, so now we're kind of getting into some of the golden nuggets. So the first one is the champion challenge structure. And some of these are going to be kind of controversial, but I don't care. So the champion challenge is, one ad set, and I'm loading it up with all of my semi-proven and iterative tests, right? So stuff that should get a lift, because the way I'm going to set that up is I'm going to use my control ad first and swap out new variables. So it's going to be the same best performing ad, but it's going to have a completely new headline. I'm going to take that control variable, dupe it out, and now it's going to have a new body copy. And I'm going to do that as many, tests as I have. Like I feel really good about these 3 headlines, these 2 texts, and this, 2 creative. So now I'm testing like 3 or 4 different things. Spend preference could vary based on the data behind that control creative. Creative usually has the largest lever. And so Facebook's going to preference that creative and give it more spend. The great thing about Champion Challenge is I would use this where there's less of a strict or rigid preference to spend behind individual ads, so that multiple ads can be in testing at the same time. And really they're duking it out. That's the Champion Challenge. We're looking for the king of the hill, and we're going to let these spend 2x our target CAC and start killing through these and finding a new champion. Because what we're typically trying to do in this, the point of this is to say, okay, we have a winner that's getting X CAC at this volume. We've hit a spend ceiling on it. How do we, get that ceiling up? One way is to find a new winner. So we'll test through these in that sort of direction, and then maybe find a new control variable. Now we found a new set of variables that are the best performing, and this becomes our new control. We start repivoting off of that champion. So this is the Champion Challenge, and this can happen for a really long time. And we like to keep it in one ad set specifically for, the consolidation of an account structure, which really helps with signal strength and the learning phase and all that fun stuff. That's one preference for a structure.
And that's as far as I understand, and I'm not, what I will say, just full disclosure for everyone, is I'm not a marketer. So I have limited experience dealing with demand gen through paid acquisition. So I guess one thing I want to understand is like the Champion Challenge, is that considered a traditional, because I've heard of people testing champions, is that a non-controversial way of sort of testing different winners? Or is what you're doing there, that initial sort of process you were talking about around the extracting data that isn't necessarily visible within your account?
I think it's going to be controversial for people who are used to ad accounts with very rigid spend preferences. Like if I throw 10 ads into one ad set, only one is going to spend at a time, and that's going to be really efficient, because the whole point of testing is the ratio between statistical significance and efficiency. We want the most amount of statistical significance for the least cost, right? Like that's the whole point of a testing structure. That's what we're all trying to achieve here. So it's going to be controversial for those people. For people who are, used to like, oh, well, I can test a bunch of stuff at the same pile, then it's not going to be controversial. For the pivot tables that I was talking about earlier and pulling this data that's kind of like, scattered throughout the entire account and getting a really good picture on, if I were to boil this ad account down to its best essence, these are the variables I would use. If I had to pick one ad based on all the variables that have data behind them, because really we just can take action based on data, I would do that. And by the way, in terms of variables, I'm looking at, CBO versus ABO too. Like if the ad account were boiled down to its best essence, this is why naming structure is important. We label ABO versus CBO so we can see overall in the account's history. If I, filter out CBO, I'm going to see CBO's aggregated data. If I filter out ABO, I'm going to see that aggregated data. And I'm going to see which one performs best. That's assuming you test them similarly. If you're testing CBO only in testing and ABO only for scaling or vice versa, obviously there's going to be a difference in your testing where, naming conventions become important again. You have testing in your naming conventions, and you could filter that too. So you can see overall in like my scaling or overall in my testing, which one is better, right? So like as controlled environments as possible. So I hope that answered your question.
No, it does. Thank you.
Yeah. So that's one side on the Champion Challenge. The other side of it is discrete testing. It's less efficient, but it's essentially Champion Challenge. It's the same process. The only difference is this account, let's say hypothetically, this account has terrible spend preference. It's only going to spend on one individual ad, and I'm in a tough spot and I have to figure out something that's going to work. I need statistical significance and I need to learn something fast. I'm going to break everything out into individual ad to ad sets and do the same type of control. One's going to, have, it's all going to be based on the control ad, and it's going to have a new variable in the naming convention of the ad set. Now I'm looking more at the ad set level because it's the same difference. I'm going to put that variable, like this is a headline test. This is the headline. This is the one that's working. And I'll do the same iteration from there. I'm going to be a little bit more strict on the budget because this is going to be a much less efficient way of testing. But in a scenario where this is really powerful is when you know you're close to sniffing out that success tactic and you just need to get that data back, and you need to get it back quickly on each individual variable. Like you're very close to pinpointing the right creative, the right headline, the right text, like the angle and the most of the sentiment is on. We're still not at target. We need to find that right success tactic that's going to get us there. Then I go to discrete testing. And the framework behind all of this is number one, individual variables. Number two, spend preference. And number three, what exactly am I testing? Because that determines how you make all of these different decisions. So there's some tactical, like applicable stuff there, but it's really, when you get into the account, it's a way of thinking, because it's a lot of if then that kind of thinking that's more from the scientific method way of looking at variables, control variables, not just let me spend money behind a bunch of random stuff and see what performs. Because a lot of people test different audiences, different numbers of ads per ad set, different number of ad sets per ad, campaigns. And a lot of this like nitty gritty button pushing, just it's pretty inefficient for the most part. And it's spreading your spend so wide. You're not like narrowing down specifically on what exactly we're doing here. So I have enough data behind it. Maybe if my account is super like pristine, like it's buttoned up to the nines, then I'll say, okay, I have a number of ads that looked pretty good. I'm going to test like, how many ads per ad set, if I'm doing CBO, how many ad sets should I have interests, lookalikes, and an open audience in my CBO, and see how the spend preference is there. CPMs are going to be a little different because you're going to have more, you're obviously going to have more inventory on the ad platform with an open audience. So spend preference is usually to the open and the CPMs are lower and everything else kind of goes. So a lot of this is really those two kind of structures, I think, are a good example of my thinking behind frameworks and what exactly are you testing the sentiment, understanding how the platform, your account functions, like how your account actually uses spend preference, and being as efficient as possible.
Got it. Thanks for walking me / us through that. I'll say that, what this brings me to is actually the other topic we're talking about is, everything you were just talking about is a combination of your own strategic thinking and everything you probably have learned firsthand doing all this yourself. And then now the question is, to what extent how are you leveraging a platform like Facebook or another ad platform versus now the like sprinkling in AI to help build any of those variations, right? And so I think this might be a natural transition into talking about the other thing we were talking about too, which is like the role of AI in any of what you're doing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the biggest and most obvious one is ChatGPT, right? Like that's spitting out so much ad copy for us. And so really like the nuance depends on like how we want to talk about how we're using it, or how we're using it is like the how is definitely on the ad copy side. So we do a lot of writing. Sometimes I'll let it help me write an email if I need a more eloquent way of saying something. I'm actually learning a lot about how to write from ChatGPT, because I'll say like, this is my thoughts vomited out into my keyboard. Distill this into something that somebody can read now. So I'm like, oh, that is a way better way of saying what I'm thinking. Thank you. But how we prompt it has really evolved from the beginning. Like, write me ad copy. Okay, now write me ad copy with this URL for this website. Some of the URLs used to not work. Somehow, like something's changed in the ChatGPT where now pretty much any URL that wasn't working before, they're all working now. A fix used to be I would literally just copy and paste a website's ad, like copy and say, write an ad for this website. Here's the ad copy. And so now we're almost treating it as a copywriter, or even we're getting creative briefs to ChatGPT and it's spitting out. So I think the way that you prompt it is really valuable. And what I'm seeing is that probably the most valuable, how ChatGPT has become the most valuable to me is the ability to quickly summarize information and distill it into something I can use. And I use that a lot in like, help me come up with angles to test for, this website. and I'll copy and paste the copy or the website copy, or you just get the URL in there. And then I'll even say, these are our best performing ads based on what's best performing and the copy on this website, spit out, 5 new angle ideas. And then I refine, okay, now you got these angle ideas for, this angle, right? 3 body copy and 2 headlines. And I'll even give it the characters, like the number of characters I want it to be. Let's say I want it to be like above the fold, and I'll say, 200 characters or less. And then the headline is like 35 characters or less or whatever, so that it's just 1 line of headline. And that's increased our efficiency. I don't know. I have no idea of a number, but it's a lot. And
you can just make up a number.
it's at least 563% more efficient.
Oh,
yeah. I think that's the main way.
What strikes me about that, and even how it ties into what we were just talking about with when you're talking about testing frameworks and ads, is like that still requires judgment, right? Like you can't just put something into Chat GPT and be like, do copywriting for me, because ultimately, and I think this is what you're saying, is like it'll create a draft for you, but ultimately you're using your judgment to assess, is this actually good? Like, how might I tweak it? I think you hit on this a bit. It was like the quality of your prompt, and just having, I guess, played with it myself over the last few weeks. Like there's like an entire rabbit hole around how detailed you can or should be around like the context you give them, or give them. I'm even referring to them as a thing now, not an it. It's a person. And so like a lot of this is around, it's not replacing people, but I think you said this before, earlier in the call, is like, it's about efficiency and being a workhorse for you. It's not replacing, I guess, if you're being more efficient, you don't necessarily have to hire as many people, but it really is around, it's like a tool.
Yeah, it's direct versus indirect. So like I think the idea is AI is not going to directly replace people yet. I mean, it will eventually, but right now what we're dealing with is indirectly replacing people by making an individual more efficient. So whereas it might have taken me, 3 copywriters to be really efficient based on the bandwidth of email clients I have, I might only need 1 now. So it's not like necessarily replacing those people, but it just takes one person goes a lot farther with AI. So the indirect way that it's replacing people right now is really just by increasing an individual's performance. And so if you're not leveraging AI, you probably should go learn these tools. There's tools that build slide decks. Midjourney is another one that we use actually, to create with just like crazy ideas. We have a designer who's just like obsessed with it, and he's coming up with crazy stuff, and he's really, really good at it. I cannot speak to how he's coming up with those prompts, because the things I come up with look like complete madness, but his look really good. He's gotten like really like specific on his frameworks. However, he's creating these like really awesome images. He's a good example of someone who's like playing with AI, and his value, I almost want to say his value's gone up, but really in the environment, his value is now matched to where he was before, and he's just maintained his value. That AI has like changed the playing field.
Yeah.
And he's kept up with it.
That's really interesting. I think it does become one of those weird things where it's like it's a skill, right? Like being like a master at Excel, right? Like you can maybe know how to open Excel. It doesn't make you very useful. Like you can enter things, but no, like people who have really understand macros and can get really nerdy into manipulating and bending these tools. It's like, this is possibly likely one of those things where it's like, and I think that the part that gets me, I wasn't that excited about it because people have been talking about AI forever, but like what's happened in the last, I mean, it's insane what's happened, I guess, the last like year and a half,
couple months,
the amount of hype. A couple months. I mean, to the point where I was like, now I just feel like a lot of this is reactionary. But what's most interesting to me is when I talk to really talented, smart friends who are really good at marketing or copywriting, and how excited they are about it, right? Like I know for me, like I wasn't all that excited early on in the blockchain, but what I noticed was that the engineers, and I mean, I'm an engineer, but the engineer, like the really smart engineers on our team were super, super deep into like Ethereum and blockchain. And that to me was like, I was like, oh, like I trust their judgment, and they're seeing something that you know, they're just spending all their free time going deep into it. And I see sort of like a similar parallel with this, where it's not just people who are like run around to different trends. It's people who are really good and they're deep diving into how to make their work better.
100%. And like to your point, even engineers, like you can use it to code stuff. I've not tried it. I don't know
Oh
code,
yeah.
but there's a way, like, if you're a programmer right now, if you do anything with development and you write code out, I don't know the jargon, but like, if you're that type of person, get to understand this tool and how you can use it to make your work easier. Because if you're more valuable, in your efficiency, you're going to be more invaluable. You're valuable to your, employers. And, there's just like there's a rate of growth in using it that we don't know. So we have to assume it's infinite, and it could, obviously it's not going to be infinite, but I think it's going to be a lot of, it's just going to be, it makes me think of where the world's going, and the world is just really going to more efficiency. But you can also like think more in terms of like society. How is it going to change schools? Because people can write essays, people can do their homework with ChatGPT. And how much, I think people fall into two categories, or at least there's two ways of thinking. What are we losing? Oh, we're losing critical thinking. Oh, we're losing all these abilities. But it's like, we built cars and we didn't lose our legs. We still have legs. We go to the gym. We don't hunt and gather food. So I'm not naturally like athletic. I have to go to the gym and manipulate my body in a very useless way to just be healthy. I think AI is a great example of like, how is this going to change, universities and schools? And when are we going to stop saying you can't use AI, to write your essays? You can't use a calculator in your math test. We've had calculators forever, and people thought that was going to make people dumb. Like, it's a very useful thing. And although I can't, tell you what 103 times 562 is off the top of my head, I have a calculator that could do that. And I have a ChatGPT that can write my essay on the man in the seat. I just I don't need to be able to do that on my own.
And I think, it almost is like, it goes back to your ability to use the tool, where being an expert in divergent topics and then being able to leverage something like Chat GPT to be able to do that, to be able to basically combine two completely different topics and find interesting like ways to connect them.
Yes. And to your point, I read a comment on Twitter that I didn't agree with, and I'm usually not confrontational, but I said, I don't agree with you. So this was I'm not very confrontational, but the comment was, I think that AI is going to make, it's going to, something along the sentiment of, it's going to increase efficiency and output, but quality is going to go down. So increased quantity, decreased quality. And I didn't necessarily agree with that, because I think like what we're talking about is experts who are excited about the platform will not allow the quality to decrease. But mediocre executors will increase, exponentially their output of mediocre quality, whilst the people of quality will, just slightly increase probably the efficiency of their output. Because like, to your point, when I get something out of ChatGPT, especially if it's ad copy, or if it's I've, admittedly tried to use it to write tweets for me and stuff like that. And it ends up giving me an idea or a place to start from. And then I take it the rest of the way. And then when I look back at what it gave me, it's like, oh, I ended up changing the topic all, together. Or the ad copy, it looks nothing like that, but it gave me a great one. It either gave me a great framework, because sometimes I'll say, rewrite this ad copy using, these 5 frameworks, IDA, all these other ones. And then I'll go, oh, this is a great framework. And then I'll pick one, and then I'll kind of, maneuver it. So that's a good point. Quality people will, maintain quality, maybe increase efficiency, or definitely will increase efficiency by a lot. But what we'll see is a lot of mediocre quality maintain low, and quantity will go up at scale. But
it makes me even think about, as you were talking, I was thinking about SEO and like SEO over time. And then you have like, well, just having a website, even the top results, we kind of assume that they're directionally correct or accurate, but we've had to learn over time not to fully trust what you read on the internet. Like, I was actually talking to my accountant the other day about something I read that was like specifically around having a specific, we'll just call it like specific types of like tax accounts. He's like, you literally can't do what you're talking about. I'm like, it's literally the top result on Google. He's like, I sent him the link. He's like, literally, this is wrong. You cannot do this with iOS. And I was like, huh, that was actually like possibly the most direct, like completely fabricated, just directly wrong Google result I've come across in recent memory. But it makes me think about, with AI, one of the issues is oftentimes like you don't necessarily know the attribution, right? So if you're taking what the chat bot spits out, like there's plenty of examples of the chatbot lying, actually. Like
Yeah.
someone had it write a biography about him and it made up a company that he actually never worked at. Like there, like 90% of it was accurate, but it said his current job was at this place. It's completely like fabricated. And then people started chiming in that apparently there's a lot of examples of AI like just like being caught in a corner and lying, which I know nothing about that, but that's the type of thing where it's like, if 90% of it's true, and you have to know a fair amount about the topic to be able to discern what, or maybe it's also like how you use the tool. It's like you can't treat this as this is exactly true. This will give me seeds to go do, to learn more, or to explore it.
That's right. There's going to be context, and there's going to be if you're trying to come up with if you're trying to write a history paper, it's going to be different than trying to write an English paper in telling a story. And like there's settings, I think, that are going to continue to get more advanced at like how erratic are you going to get with like your responses on ChatGPT, and you can change you make all these adjustments to be as accurate as possible, or to be the least repetitive or whatever. Candidly, I've not really gotten into those, but I'm sure like as it goes along, it'll become more and more. But yeah, I think at a certain point, it's got to fill in the dots. And there was an example, someone was saying, or I was listening to it somewhere, that somebody was trying to say, write some reviews for me, and or like pull reviews or quotes from this or that or the other, and it pulled the quotes, and then it said, are these real quotes? And it said, yes, these are real quotes from real people. And then he looked up those quotes and he said, I found that like some of them were not really quotes from the people or whatever he was like, the book he was looking at. And he was like, are you sure? I think that some of these are lies. And like, yeah, some of these are not like really quotes. And like somehow it was like a conversation of like, I did lie. It like almost admitted like, yeah, that's not true.
Yeah,
I made it up. Like with short of apologizing for lying. But that's the difference between it's not replacing a human, it's just increasing our efficiency. And obviously we still have to use our brain and fact check some of these things and use it to increase our output. The time, or like how far away are we from AI having its own brain and ability to discern these things and understand like, how do I find what's true or not if I'm going to write a history paper to fact check these things? I don't know how far away we are from that. I mean, I'm not in that world at all. I'm just observing it. So it's interesting.
No, well, I guess TBD. We'll see
TBD.
As this unfolds.
Remind me in a year.
Oh man, I really appreciate you coming on the show. I would say any parting thoughts or things that you would want to leave to people I know we went over sort of two very divergent topics with some connection.
I think, testing frameworks are super fun. I think the biggest overarching thing is know how your account behaves and make decisions accordingly, as opposed to going to Twitter, Facebook, or whatever guru and, blindly applying their one size fits all testing framework. Like there's a lot more dynamic to it, and just hold efficiency and statistical significance, and that'll guide you to a structure that's solid, because those two are in direct opposition to each other. And then AI, get good at AI, figure out how it can best, how it can make you a better performer in whatever field you're in. And this is like it's a completely new market. It's like infinite value you can add to yourself, because who's kind of still ignoring AI, who's still saying, oh, this is going to hurt us and it's not the way of the future. I mean, it's here and people are using it. We're using it. We're looking at people who can use it. Actually, we used to have in our job descriptions as one of the like main, your requirements is your ability to use Google search. Like instead of instead of just coming out and ask how to do this, like you have Google at your fingertips. Like you can ask Google. Now it's even more intense. You have ChatGPT. If you say you can't write ad copy, maybe you don't understand all the frameworks, but ChatGPT 1 can teach you, and then it can help you write it. So, I mean, like there's so much value in it. Go learn the tools in your industry.
That's great. One question I like to end with is asking you, like, do you have a big ask? Is there something that would transform your life or your business if it were to be true, that you can kind of put it out into the ether?
Oh man, I have not thought of that. And it's going to drive me crazy because I know I'll think of something an hour later and go, wait, come back on, let's hit record.
Yeah.
One big ask. I don't know. I think in terms of growing the agency and what I would have an ask for the agency, I mean, one of my big goals is just connect with as many people as possible. And so if you know of groups of people that need help on Facebook ads, whether it's B2B or B2C or whatever, uh, and you're looking for, a partner, reach out. Happy to chat through helping your people out.
And what's an ideal customer look like for you guys? Is there a specific stage or level of growth or revenue?
There's not really. Actually, really we look at whether or not we really believe that we can help your product. That's it. Because Hunt a Killer, we built from scratch, especially Eric. He was very involved at the early stages. We still do their email. But, starting from scratch, both of our Inc. #1 fastest growing companies, we were with at day zero. So,
Okay.
I mean, we don't completely ignore people who are just starting, don't have, data in their Facebook ad account and, aren't spending more than 6 figures on ads a month, right? Like, we don't necessarily look at that in terms of perfect fit. We almost look at the people we're working with and saying, like, are you non-deterministic? Are you open and trusting of our ideas and how we operate? And, do we really think that there's a future here? Because we look at our clients as investments. We're relatively small. We work with anywhere around 35, 40 clients at a time, and spend anywhere between 2 to 5 million a month, obviously given between Q1 and Q4. So kind of gives you the idea of the size of clients we typically end up working with, whether they start with us at ground zero or they're coming in at, 6, even 7 figures a month. So
Awesome. Well, that's helpful context. Thank you. And what's the best way for people to get in touch with you? I know you do tweets. You're active on Twitter. We'll include your Twitter link in the show notes.
There you go. Yeah. At Twitter, I'm the most active on Twitter. I do post on Facebook and LinkedIn from time to time, but you're going to get more of my candid thoughts and ideas as they come to me, and some of the more of the valuable things around Facebook ads and operations in a business on Twitter.
Awesome. Yeah. And we'll include a link to your agency site too. So, well, Landon, thanks so much for coming on the show. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. Yep. Had a good time.